Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor here at Worn and Wound. Thank you once again for tuning in to the podcast. We have a really fun show for you today. I'm joined by Garrett Jones. Garrett is our in-house photographer. This is not his first appearance on the Worn and Wound podcast, but it's his first solo appearance on the Worn and Wound podcast. So we're going to talk about a recent press trip that he went on, which was pretty incredible, and also just kind of like get to know him through his background and his interests in the EDC and watch worlds. Garrett, how's it going? It's great to see you.
No, Zach, it's great. I'm happy to be back. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. We're recording this on a Monday. It's been a very hectic Monday, at least for me. And I know you're back from vacation, so that like puts a whole new level of. Um, I mean, it must be very hectic for you in the office coming back from a week off, right?
Yeah, I think hectic is a bit of an understatement. There's always a lot of stuff to do at the start of a week, and then having been off for a week just kind of adds to that. But hit the ground running, dive right in, and just keep on rolling.
That's the right attitude. I usually tend to need a vacation from my vacation, so the that like integrating back into like the daily grind is challenging. But sounds like you've got a good perspective on it. Anyway, appreciate you joining me for the podcast. I've been looking forward to doing this with you for a while. Like I said, I think we've got a great handful of topics to discuss. Before we get into that, let's do a wrist check. What are you wearing today?
So I have on a Citizen Fujitsubo. It is the limited edition for the 35th anniversary of the ProMaster line. Actually, it ties in really well with what we'll get into later in the show. But this is, it's been on my wrist almost consistently since I've got it. Titanium, blue dial, black bezel, super lightweight, feels great, just goes everywhere. What about you? What do you got on today?
I'm wearing my Tudor Black Bay 41 with the burgundy bezel. I've been wearing it pretty much all weekend. Just sort of easily kind of like transitioned into the Monday watch for me. So I like that Fujitsu that you're wearing. That's a like uncommonly light watch. It's one of those watches that you pick up and you're just like, how is this possible? It seems it's like
Yeah,
otherworldly to
I'll
me.
forget that it's on my wrist and like I'll snap my arm to do something and like I can feel the rotor spin inside the case, which is just a weird phenomenon. It's
Yeah.
so light, but it's super interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really cool piece. Um, all right, so Garrett, let's dive into it. I want to give you a chance to sort of introduce yourself to the Worn and Wound podcast audience. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got into photography, because that's really sort of your your area of expertise, at least in terms of how it applies to Worn and Wound. You're our in-house photographer for watches, both for editorial and shop content, and you also shoot a bunch of other things. So how'd you get into this world?
Yeah, so I born and raised just outside of Louisville, Kentucky, in a small town called Mount Washington, and it was kind of one of those towns where almost everyone wanted to leave and get out and do something with their life, or they stayed there and found a job and found satisfaction. And I was kind of one of those people that I was happy where I was at, but I wanted to grow and push myself, and kind of got exposed to the world of photography in those mid-teen years, around 14, 15. And then about a year later at 16, kind of saved up some birthday money, and rather than getting a car, I bought a camera,
Hmm.
and it's kind of become a joke. My One of my parents actually told me, they're like, "Why do you want to buy a camera? That's just a waste of money." And then now, almost 10 years later, to be doing this full time, it's just kind of funny to see it come full circle. And they love reminding me that they said that and kind of pushed me to go farther. But it started as a hobby, and then I fell in love with it and just kept working to be better every time I picked up the camera. And then one thing led to another, and here I am doing it full time.
Yeah, I it's sort of a common theme with with professional photographers, but like I don't think I've ever seen you like without a camera like in your hand or like strapped to you somehow. Like you just always are shooting. Um is that sort of it seems like, because I know you have like a sort of like an EDC perspective on things, like you're kind of like always carrying a camera and like always shooting. So is that sort of your Is that, like, how you got good at photography? It's just through, like, repetition and practice?
Yeah, I mean that's really my philosophy to it all. You know, I started with an iPad and then an iPod and then a Nikon DSLR,
Mhm,
a D3300, moved up to a Z6, and now I rock a Sony kit. But my whole philosophy has just been, if you're gonna get better, you have to keep doing it
mhm.
consistently. So it's whether it's a single shot a day or it's a couple hundred shots because I find something interesting. It's always shoot, 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 learn from what I like, what I dislike, and just push myself to be better. And like I said, just keep growing.
Yeah. Is there something like a particular like subject that you really enjoy shooting? I know like shooting watches is a relatively new vocation for you, and I want to talk about sort of like your hobbies and interests like outside of the watch world because I think that's pretty important to sort of like understanding your perspective. But like, what did you find yourself kind of like most drawn to, like particularly in the early days of your photography as a subject?
Yeah, I really kind of cut my teeth with automotive. A lot of people in my family were big gearheads, and so going to car shows was the Friday night activity. Even more so than like the hometown college or hometown football game. And so just really kind of got my start there with cars at car shows, and then as things progressed I realized that while I loved vintage cars, I don't have that kind of budget, and I found myself getting into backpacks and EDC gear kind of at a cross transition time, and then stopped doing automotive as much because I wasn't around some of the car shows and in that scene as much, and started doing a lot more of like EDC pocket checks and flat lays and backpack photos, and just kind of really cut my teeth there again to learn a different format and start pushing towards a more product style
Hmm.
while heavily focused on social media. Um, Around the time that EDC was blowing up again on Instagram and Facebook, and just kind of rode the wave and just dove into it heavily.
So that's a good transition because that's how I kind of came to know you as as an EDC person and as an EDC photographer. Before you, joined our team officially, you had written a handful of articles that are kind of like EDC focused for Worn and Wound, and I was really drawn to your style of photographing like backpacks and um, other kind of like EDC paraphernalia. Um, because I usually I see these things in a particular context, but you live in New York City, and it's just kind of like striking to see, like a very sort of like robust like backpack, for example, or a pocket knife, something that does not, conjure, thoughts of like being in an urban environment, like in that environment. Um, so anyway, I just thought that was like really striking, something like interesting about your photography. Do you find it interesting to kind of like put these things in like recontextualize them in like in a slightly different way than how they're normally seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely like on social media today, there's a have like definitely a view that knives and EDC tools, and I'll use tools are weapons, so to
Mhm,
speak. And granted, like they can be in the wrong hands, but at the end of the day, I'm carrying it all to help myself complete a task. Like I got to open a box or I got to cut a zip tie, and so I've always looked at it kind of the same way I look at watches, is that it's a mechanical object that has a level of artsmanship and craftsmanship that's gone into its production, whether it's a one off designed knife that's hand forged by someone, or it's a production folder. Same thing with like a piece unique or a production run watch. It's really just appreciating the item for the intrinsic beauty that's there and the
mhm.
craftsmanship that went into it. And so trying to show it in a light that like, hey, here's a tool that could be something terrible, but is also really unique and functional in
Yeah,
everyday life.
yeah. Where did watches begin to kinda come into play for you? Was it something that you were introduced to through the EDC world, or did you, like, kinda, like, were you, like, into watches before you started, collecting backpacks and shooting EDC, stuff? Like, how do the watches actually fit in for you?
It's kind of interesting. During COVID, I was working for a company that was in the medical industry, and my boss actually got into watches and was trying to flip and do this the I'm going to be a gray market dealer side hustle whole 9 yards never really went anywhere for him. But it kind of opened my eyes to, hey, there's a market where A, these are valuable, and B, there's a lot of respect for the craftsmanship that goes into it. And so that kind of just opened my eyes to the whole new world. I'd already been into the EDC world and was shooting backpacks for a while, and just realized, like, hey, here's a really nice addition to my EDC collection, that's also extremely functional. And, like, I can wear a watch anywhere and it's fine. No one's going to give me a funny look. Whereas, like,
Hmm.
if I pull out a pocket knife on the subway, it's
Yeah,
not going to end well for
don't
me.
do that. Yeah.
So it's a functional art piece is kind of the way that I look at them, and that, which is great. And they tell me time, and they look great while they do it.
What are some of your favorite watches? Right, you mentioned the Citizen, which I know you now have a personal connection to because of this amazing trip that you went on that we're going to talk about. But what are your, like, some of your, like, kind of go to, like, daily wear pieces?
Yeah, so I've been grabbing the Fujitsubo a lot since it's been in the collection. Another kind of really what got me into watches was a custom Seiko that I purchased, which is kind of a mod podge of like an SKX 007, um, a combination of a pilot and a diver. It's really hard to describe, but it's a really, like, matte black with a tiny touch of red that just
Yeah.
gives a little bit of pop. So usually either like a diver style watch like that, or my other go to is just a super lightweight quartz field watch, something that I can beat up and not have to worry about it. My go to pick there is a titanium Bertucci that was
Mm,
gifted to me, that's been around the world with its previous owner, and now I'm working on getting it back around the world for a second time and just
that's
adding
cool.
more scratches.
Bertucci is a brand that I think is really, like, they're a great brand and, like, really kind of under the radar. The thing that I love about Bertucci is that they really just do field watches. Like, so many brands try to um, sort of like be everything to everyone, and, like, they dip their toes into every possible every possible genre of watch. And Bertucci is, like, so hardcore focused on field watches and field watches only. um, I really admire that. I own a Bertucci that has, like, a fully loomed case. It's made of, like some sort of plastic material that just has, like, loom, like, throughout it. Just a really fun piece. They're a very cool brand. I'm glad you're getting some enjoyment out of yours.
Yeah, and they're like, in my opinion, they're at that perfect price point of whether you're an enthusiast that wants a cheaper beater,
Mhm.
or you're coming into the genre and, like, I want something I can gift to a friend of mine, or hey, here's, a first watch that you might spend 100 bucks on, and if you don't like it, then you're not majorly invested in. So it's kind of a really nice positioned brand that offers a lot of flexibility in their product line.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely, like, you kinda have to be, like, a little in the know about something to, like, get into Bertucci, like, either, like, be, like, deep into the watch world, or I imagine there's, like, a lot of crossover probably with Bertucci and the EDC world, probably more so than most watch brands, I would think. So yeah, that's a cool one. We'll leave a link to Bertucci's website in the show notes, so folks can check them out. Um, I wanna transition to the Citizen trip, because we ran a story, which we'll link to, of course, in the show notes, on this trip. And I don't often get, like, FOMO from from, like, seeing folks go on, like, press trips and things. Like, I get to go on enough of those trips to kind of, like, enjoy myself, and it's a lot of fun. But, like, this looked like insanely fun. Just like an incredibly cool, looks like an incredibly cool experience. Um, Kind of like, first of all, like, you went to, it was Banff, right? The national park in Canada where you
Yeah, it's
most.
Banff National Park. I think it's Banff Provincial Park
Okay.
is the correct term, but I mean National Park does exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It puts the right image in your mind.
So tell us about this trip and what you did, um, and what you packed, because I know that you're, like, you're very every time you go somewhere, every time you, like, head to a wind up, or head on one of these trips, you post, like, your luggage, your suitcase, and, like, I know you're, like, very conscious of your pack. So what was this trip all about, and what did you take with you that you can share with us?
Yeah. So The whole trip was to celebrate the 35th anniversary of Citizens ProMaster line of watches, which is really geared towards the high octane adventure seeking consumer, which is a really interesting positioning in the market. And so we kind of had an idea of what we were getting ourselves into just with a rough itinerary. But then every day we were there, they basically gave us the opportunity to continue to push ourselves and, push physical boundaries, mental boundaries, and just challenge ourselves to really reach new levels. So while we were there, we did polar plunges. We did rappelling inside of canyons. We ended up doing some heli hiking,
Hmm.
which put us at some elevations that a majority of us probably couldn't have reached on our own. Um, you might call it cheating, but it just let me get that iconic mountain summit picture
Yeah.
without being completely out of breath, which was really, really nice. And just overall, it was a really good opportunity to make some new connections in the watch industry because like you mentioned, I'm new to this field. So this was my first press trip and got to meet some guys that are behind the scenes or the face of some of the bigger
Hmm.
publications that are in the watch industry. And it's just really cool to kind of see, a how things operate behind the scenes on these press trips, but also then to take a step back and watch these other creators and influencers, I guess is a good word
Hmm.
in the industry, just kind of how they operate and how they work. And just really interesting overall. And was a great trip. And then as far as gear goes, I checked a bag, which I hate doing,
Yeah, you
just
never do
because I
that. That's
no,
very
yeah,
unusual for you.
yeah, I prefer to have all of my gear with me. That said, being in the EDC sphere, it's a little challenging to take a bulk of my EDC gear on a plane.
Sure.
TSA doesn't like pocket knives, understandably. So I checked a bag. Which contained a wetsuit, a multi tool, and a bunch of clothing for the course of the week. But then in my personal carry on, I had a full camera kit, which is a Sony A7CR, a Sigma 24 to 72.8 art, and then a Sony 100 to 400 just massive telephoto lens that
Hmm.
I wasn't sure I was going to need, but it was one of those things where I wasn't going to be without it just in case I needed to reach out and get that shot. And it came in handy a couple times on the trip, but it definitely made for a heavy pack while we
Yeah,
were walking around.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's a big lens. Um, so you mentioned a wetsuit. That's a wetsuit that was supplied to you by Citizen, I imagine. It's not your wetsuit. What went through your mind when they told you you're going to need to get fitted for a wetsuit for this trip? Were you thinking? I would have been thinking, what have I gotten myself into? Um,
Yeah,
wh-
that's kind of exactly what went through my head. In the email chain prepping for the trip, they were like, "All right, we're gonna send over the wetsuit to you," and I'm like, "Okay, cool. It's a wetsuit." Like I'm just thinking like a jacket or some pants to put on while we're out doing whatever, not realizing that it's like a full 7 mil thick two
yeah,
piece wetsuit. So when I picked it up, really my first thought was, "Oh dear Lord, what have I gotten myself into?" And immediately followed by, "How am I going to keep my camera dry while we're doing this?" Because if we're getting a wetsuit, that means we're going to be in water and it's
sure.
going to be cold. And no surprise, it was glacier fed water, so it was very cold. Um, but ended up, just kind of packed everything in and made sure to bring a dry bag and some camera cubes so that I could keep my stuff secure and dry at the same time, and just led to an awesome trip.
Yeah, that's great. So you got a bunch of great photos. And again, I would encourage people to kind of like to check out the article. A lot of what you captured looks like kind of legitimately dangerous, particularly the thing that like I would have nightmares about is like the repelling thing, like into the canyons. Like it just looks um like a way that you could like accidentally die if you're not very careful. Like a lot of I find that this is true, I think, in a lot of contexts in the watch industry. A lot of brands will send you on press trips where it seems like um, things might be kind of dangerous and adventurous, but like you get there and there's like a lot of guardrails, like it's like the whitewater rafting experience is more like a lazy river experience, like for example. I'm not
Yeah,
going
it
to put
looks
any
good on
brands on.
socials, but
Yeah,
not that dangerous. Yeah.
yeah. I got the sense though that with this trip, like it was pretty real. Because you were on this trip with like some actual, like, some very serious like athletes and climbers and what have you. So like it was the real deal, right? Like you're really like like slamming up against rocks and and everything and with the rappelling and all.
Yeah, there was no social media, let me make this look good type stuff going on. It was, I mean, like it was truly the real deal. We showed up on day two. They're like, all right, we're gonna go canyoning, which my understanding was we were gonna go hike through a canyon and we might get a little wet. And then early in the day as we're showing up, they're like, okay, cool. Here's your harness. Here's a better wetsuit that's more suited to sliding down rock faces. Oh, by the way, if none of you all have ever seen me, I'm 5'8" with about a 10-inch beard. They go, hey, Garrett, make sure you keep your beard out of the harness because it will grab and rip your beard out. I'm happy to say that I came back beard intact. Um,
And
but
face
it
intact
was,
too. I would like I
yeah,
imagine it would rip off more than your beard if you yeah.
yeah, and thankfully come back, fully intact. But it was 100% full rappel. They gave us a quick how to course of this hand needs to go below this certain point, and your other hand's going to go on your backside and kind of give you a monkey tail is what they call it, and you just slowly let the rope feed through your hands, and that's you control yourself as you go down. And it started pretty simple with about a 10-foot wall, and then it was a 15-foot wall, and then a 20-foot wall, and then it culminated in a 60-foot drop, basically through a crevasse that had an active flowing glacier waterfall at the same time. So it really was a, you're going to go and learn a new skill set, but also there is a chance you could not walk away from this. So take your time, pay attention, and be
Yeah.
smart about what you're doing.
Is it something that you think you would like do again? Like, can you see yourself like taking like like a vacation, for example, like for your own, enjoyment, like doing this sort of activity now that you have like this skill under your belt?
I don't really know. I did enjoy it. I had a great time. It's not exactly what I consider fun, but
Yeah, it
I
doesn't
had
seem
an
super
absolute
relaxing to
no, it's a little stressful while you're doing it. But I think really the payoff at the end of the day was like, hey, I did this. I pushed myself and I got through it. So if presented with the opportunity to do it again, I 100% would and I'd say yes. But I don't know if it's going to be the first activity that I'm like, oh, I have a couple days off. Let me go rappel down the side of this canyon.
yeah.
Um, but along those lines, while we were there, I got a chance to boulder with Will Gadd, who is a
Mhm.
renowned ice climber and rock climber. Actually climbed Niagara Falls while they were frozen. He was the only person to ever do so. But in while we were bouldering around with him, kind of really opened my eyes that while I don't care for sliding down the rope down the side of the cliff, I do like indoor climbing, and so that's something that I'm looking to kind of add in and pick up to my activity rotation.
Yeah.
There's a couple gyms near the office that I need to go check out
Yeah.
once I have a bit of free time, but definitely got to pick that up as a skill set and go
That's
from
awesome.
there.
That's great. Tell me about the hella hiking because this is one of the things that was most interesting to me. Just kind of like reading through your piece and also seeing the images. I like how you describe it as like possibly cheating a little bit. That appeals to me. I'd love to cheat. When I can. And when it comes to this type of thing, it's nice to get a nice view without having to like put the work in. But I imagine like you're at altitude and there's still some hiking involved. So it's like I imagine it's still probably like a lot of physical exertion, like even though you're being like helicoptered to like a peak essentially, right?
Yeah, and there's definitely is still a level of physical exertion, and it kind of like to a degree, in my opinion, it makes it a tiny bit harder because part of going up in altitude, your body adjusts to
Yeah.
the height difference because the air is thinner as you go higher. So doing the heli lift up so high kind of just drops you into the thick of it. But it does put you at a much higher elevation. And then you're still like, we still would hike a mile or two or more, depending on where we were going once we got dropped off. And so it's not like it's like, oh, I'm just going to get dropped off at the peak of the mountain. You're still going to work for that summit. But it does, it takes what might be an all day or 2 day affair and knocks it down to 2 to 3 hours. And they were really good about kind of sectioning us out in groups with, because we had full blown athletes that are, like world renowned in their skill set, or athlete influencers that are on TV like Horatio and Nerys from the Challenge, and so they're at a different level than some of the other people were, and so we kind of split up, and like those that were able to really push themselves would get dropped off lower and
Mhm.
hike a lot farther or do a lot steeper route. Those that were a little less physically inclined got a bit of a boost and dropped off a little bit higher on the mountain, but you still worked for it and you pushed yourself, and it really made getting to each of the peaks that we hit just an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
Breathtaking in two different ways, but very enjoyable along the way.
Yeah. It's the altitude like really does kind of like it if you've never experienced like the air at altitude, like it really is a very different experience. I can recall my first time on a press trip in the Swiss Alps and like taking a train up a peak, to get like a nice view um of the Matterhorn, and like you step off the train and you're suddenly like you're in the mountains and you're walking and like you realize like you don't have like the lung capacity that like you normally do. And like it's kind of frightening like at first when you realize that like you're like am I gonna pass out, like is this like is this really happening, like but then you adjust and it's like you can kind of like appreciate the beauty, but yeah, that must have been an insanely cool experience.
No, it really is, and it kind of like it opened my eyes a lot to the level of athleticism of the group that was with us, and gave me a whole understanding of why athletes will go live at higher elevation and
Yeah.
train themselves, and then come down to compete at a lower elevation. Just because if you can push your body while you're struggling for air because it's thinner, then when you come down to a more oxygen rich environment, you're able to compete at a whole different level, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting on two different ways to see what the human body's possible in, at elevation and lower, and then also just to stand among mountains that are millions of years old and realize that, like, hey, I'm here and I'm happy that I'm here, but in the grand scheme of things I'm small and insignificant in the world, and it really puts yourself in perspective.
Yeah, it's kinda impossible not to think about those things when you're in an environment, like that, which is just I mean, we're incredibly privileged to be able to, like, go on these trips and have these sorts of experiences because like, it really does sorta, like there's, like, a personal growth aspect to it that's, like, unavoidable, like, if you really, like, think about these things, so, yeah, no, that's great, I'm really glad you're able to do that. Um I want to ask you specifically about the photography on this trip because you're describing this situation that is, physically taxing and challenging, and you've got to be careful, for your own safety. How do you like? How do you get the shot? Like, how do you incorporate, your kind of, like responsibility, frankly, as a photographer, in this environment when you're kind of like dealing with the unfamiliar and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, my kind of school of thought when it comes to photography is no matter what the environment is, especially when you're in a very fast paced or high adrenaline environment, you have to kind of slow yourself down and think about what's going on around you, start lining up the shots, and then just attack it methodically from there. I mean, it's very easy to with digital cameras just to go out and quote, like spray and pray and hope you get a good
Mhm,
image. But if you, and that works, I'm not going to negate that. But if you take a minute and slow yourself down, you're able to be like, okay, cool. This person's walking up the side of this cliff and like they're 10 feet away from a section where it's going to look way more adventure and thrilling than where they're at right now. So if I give them a couple of minutes to get in position, and then ask them to stop and pose or catch it candidly, then your photos and your content just kind of hits a new level before you even do any kind of post production process on it. So it's a lot of planning and the forethought and making sure that like the simple things like my SD card is formatted, my
mhm.
batteries are charged, I have the right lens on the camera body, my settings are right, And then it's also there is a level of having the right gear as well, um, whether it's the right lens on the body, like I mentioned, the 24 to 70 or the 100 to 400, or even just having your camera rapidly accessible. So, like, I prefer a Peak Design capture clip that goes on my backpack chest strap or on a
Hmm.
belt, and it keeps my camera locked in securely where it's not going to fall off, but it also allows me to have the camera in my hands in about 30 seconds, and then I can quickly get a shot from there and just, keep on with whatever's going on around me.
Yeah. Um, I imagine it just takes practice to be able to sort of like stay in the moment and be able to, like appreciate the experience for what it is, and also, um, like be able to like get a good photo or get like a bunch of good photos, in a particular situation. I think, um, that's one of the things I struggle with as an amateur photographer, that I, just sort of like taking pictures for fun. It's, when I'm taking photos, like I'm not good at photography, so, like, I'm always, like, thinking through, like, everything, and I sort of, like, lose track of, like, whatever, like, experience I'm in. So, like, I mean, credit to you for being able to, like, balance it all in a, in an environment like that. It's really, really important.
No, I appreciate that, Zach, but I would argue that you have a level of skill you don't realize you have, because I've seen your journey from phone photography to now your Q2. Still waiting on you to pick up that Q3, but we'll let you cross that bridge in time. But I've noticed,
Need to
like,
refund the replenish the, geez, the camera fund, the watch fund? Like, what
yeah,
I don't know where to draw the draw the funds for this, particular hobby, but,
yeah,
yeah.
it takes it's a tax to keep acquiring new gear. But that said, I mean, I've seen your progression even over the last couple months, and like you're getting a lot better at framing and lighting, and you're getting the basics down. So as you continue to progress and you pick up that new kit, it'll be really interesting to just kind of watch you grow and watch your journey as well.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. It's a work in progress. I really do enjoy it. It's fun. I've messed around with, with cameras just because I'm like a nerd, for like a very long time. I've had like a bunch of, cameras over the years, but nothing that, I find is, um, like enjoyable to use and like intuitive as the Q2. It's just like it's got a user interface, and like you get like instant feedback, that's sort of unlike any other camera system I've dealt with. So I'm really enjoying it. I can get like two good photos of any particular watch at like a press event, which is like all I really need to be able to do. I'll leave it to the professionals to get like the full suite of photos for a review. I can get like one or two. That's fine.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, if you go to an event and you grab one or two and you're happy with it, that's what matters. If you're happy and you had fun going out and shooting, then there's nothing better than that as a photographer.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Um any like tips for like people like me, like amateur photographers who like might find themselves in, like a wilderness environment? Maybe not something like so intense as like, what you experienced with Citizen, but like if you're just like kind of on vacation, like camping or something, or you have a opportunity to like shoot some wildlife. Um what what would you recommend, like, people kind of, like, do to prepare, for that, to, like, make their photography as, enjoyable and, like, high quality as possible?
Yeah, it's a complicated process to a degree, and it's a huge secret of mine. And the trick is really just to slow down and
Mhm.
be familiar with your camera. I can't tell you the number of times that I've like gotten tunnel vision while I'm out shooting on a personal project, and I'll be like, "Oh, I got to get it from this angle," and I'll take a step back and like walk halfway around something at like 10 feet in a different angle, and notice like, oh, the sunlight's coming through the trees this way, or now it's reflecting off of a car rim and it looks so much better. And I wouldn't have found that if I hadn't have slowed down. And then the flip side of that is just by using your camera around the house or around town or just in daily life, you'll find that you get a muscle memory for changing settings.
Mhm.
And then you'll be able to really just kind of like look at a setting that you want to take a photo of and say, okay, like I need to adjust the aperture, I need to change the shutter speed to kind of dial it in. and you get good at that, and then you reach a point where you can just start flipping through settings without even looking at it, and then because you're able to work while keeping focus, you're able to adjust settings while keeping focus on what's going on. You're able to once again slow down, take a better look at things, and you're not rushing yourself. And then that to me was the biggest trick that really, in my opinion, let me grow as a photographer.
Yeah. That seems like good advice to me. I like it just being able to like slow down and not be in like a constantly hectic state is like that's just good life advice, I think, to like to be able to um just sort of like relax and like take things as they come seems like the way to kind of like approach photography and a lot of other things too.
Yeah, it really is, and we live in a society that kind of promotes and glorifies that hustle and bustle 24/7 grind, and
Sure.
if that's where you live and you thrive, more power to you. I've over the last couple of years, I've found that when I take a step back and I slow down, I feel better, I'm happier, and also like while I want to capture what's going on around me, whether it's a work event or personal or anything, I also want to experience it firsthand, not through a lens. And so taking those 5, 10, 15 minutes to kind of just enjoy the moment, the opportunities that I have, just puts me in a much better mental state and helps me be better as a
Yeah.
person and as a photographer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Um I want to come back to your, your job, like your work at Warren Man, which is primarily shooting watches, which is a different, kind of like mandate for you than what you did before, which is primarily shooting like EDC gear, for yourself and for social media. What are the challenges that you've found in like shooting watches in particular? And what have you learned about kind of like taking the best possible photos of watches that maybe like you weren't expecting, like things that you weren't expecting coming from the EDC world.
No, that's a really good question, Zach. And my kind of personal two arch enemies, if you will, have been double dome crystals
Mm,
and polished stainless steel.
yeah.
Reflections may look interesting from a distance, but when you're trying to get a shot of a crystal or you want to get a photo of a bracelet link and you see your face in the reflection, it's a little frustrating. So that's kind of been my biggest challenges at time is just working with the angles with the lighting, and also this is the biggest one really for me is that making sure whatever you're taking a picture of is clean.
Mm,
I can't
yeah.
tell you how many times I'll take a photo, I'm like, all right, I nailed this. I'll look at the back of the camera and the photo looks great, and I'll import it and I'm like, oh yeah, there's dust between the links, or oh, there's a little bit of a fingerprint smudge on the crystal. And so it kind of really goes back to that like slow down and be methodical of like, all right, I'm going to take a photo, let me get a rocket blower and dust off the watch, and let me take a microfiber and make sure the crystal's clean, or let me get in between the links on the
Hmm.
bracelet, just because you'd be surprised what accumulates in there. And we get watches that are everything from brand new in the plastic to press samples that have made their rounds. And I personally love seeing how watches patina and wear, but I know some people want to see what it's going to look like when they're going to open the package.
Sure.
So being smart about how you prep to go into a shoot and cleaning your subject really makes it a whole lot better.
Yeah, watches are very dirty objects just in general because like you wear them
Very,
on your
yeah.
body, you wear them outside, you wear them in like every possible, environment. Like they get gross. So public service announcement, I guess, to listeners, like clean your watches, like just every once in a while, like, like obviously like, if they're water resistant, just like put them in soapy water and just use like a, light, a light cleaner to kind of get them clean. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like there's especially with press samples, sometimes press samples I feel like are abused, like maybe more than they should be. I always try to be
It's
kind.
almost like a rented car. There's
Yeah.
no better vehicle to get you anywhere or go faster than a rental. And I think press watches are the same way. A lot of people get an opportunity like, hey, here's this brand new watch. I'm gonna push it. And look,
Yeah.
more power to him. I respect it. I personally want to know how something's gonna break or what's gonna fail. Does make my life a little bit challenging when I get a watch that's all scratched up and I need to make it look really nice and polished in
Yeah.
photos.
Yeah, 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 that's an interesting like, the things, like, probably most people don't think about is, what goes on behind the scenes in a watch media company. It's a lot of cleaning watches and making sure that things kinda look presentable. Um, so you've been with the team now, like, full-time for, oh, what, like, 5, 6 months or so since, Wind Up San Francisco? It's been how long has it been?
It feels like 6 months, and that's I keep thinking like, oh yeah, I've been here 6 months. It's actually been about four and a half,
Okay.
which is kind of interesting to think of. But yeah, I've
Well,
been full time with the team.
you've been part of the environment. I mean, you were writing, contributing, beforehand. It's like I've known you longer than that. But
Yeah,
you've
I've kind of been interacting with the team since December of
yeah.
23, which puts us I guess that really puts us closer to 9 months of kind of
Mhm.
being in and around and interacting with everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So in that time, in that like, pre full-time and post full-time employment, you've seen a lot of watches at this point. Like you've had an opportunity to go to some events and photograph some watches that have come in for review and for other reasons. Um what like stands out? Like is there something that was like particularly interesting or crazy or like unexpected that had a chance to shoot that you were just like I can't believe I'm looking at this thing or like what is this even?
Yeah, that's a really loaded question there, Zach. You're really throwing me on the spot there. There's
Take
been
it
a
however you'd
ton.
like. There's a million ways you can answer this one.
Yeah, look, I'll say that there's been a ton of amazing opportunities. The Citizen trip is a great example of the press side of things. We've had some really interesting and unique items come into the studio, whether it's an $80,000 Laurent Ferrier or I'm trying to think of the name of that really expensive lighter that you sent me that was like $1,500, I
Oh,
think.
the Dunhill lighter?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that one.
that was
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
That was eye-opening. I didn't realize lighters could be that expensive. I like my Zippos, but that was really cool to
Yeah,
see.
that was a cool thing.
But I think personally, probably the most interesting thing that I've gotten to be a part of in the last 6 months ish was a GS9 club event with Grand Seiko where they had a true professional watchmaker come in from Japan who assembled an entire movement in front of us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those things that like I've always been interested in, like the custom Seikos and the modified G Shocks, and like really taking something, making it your own, opening the case up, and seeing how things work. So to watch someone without magnification, I might add, only an
Mhm.
eye loop, put together an entire movement from the base plate up in like 26-30 minutes was just absolutely mind-blowing to know that like he has the skill set and the ability to do that. And
Yeah.
it's like that's really kind of one of the things that I enjoy seeing no matter what it is seeing people that are extremely good at something in their environment and just being efficient at doing something, whether it's building watches or taking photos or driving a car.
Yeah.
It's a level of excellence that you only get by a lot of repetition and a whole lot of skill. And it's always great to see.
Yeah. It's kind of a cool party trick too to like put a movement together like that
Yeah.
in 20
Yeah, it was
minutes and
very interesting.
yeah, and like these movements are not this is not like a straightforward movement. Like it's complicated and it's like incredibly like these movements are immaculately finished and something that I think a lot of people might not understand is that when a movement is finished like that, like the chances that you'll like ruin something just go like way up, like if like these beveled edges or and other like little details, like if you handle those wrong, like it's ruined forever. So for a watchmaker to be able to like put a movement like that together that's so finely finished in such a short amount of time, it's just like that's an incredibly impressive thing.
Yeah, it really just goes to speak to the level of precision that team has, as a whole, but then
Hmm.
also the amount of time that the watchmakers, at Grand Seiko have put into refining their skill. And like, I know that as skilled as they are, there's people that are equally as skilled behind all of the major brands. And so
Hmm.
if I get an opportunity to go peek behind the scenes at anyone else, you can bet I'll be first in line, and you can just kind of, go see how everything's built from the ground up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's one of the coolest things we were, able to be a part of, working in this industry is kind of like seeing how these incredible things like actually work. Because there's like such a cool story, behind that, and it's just a fascinating thing. Um, Garrett, last question for you before we kind of like put a bow on this podcast. I want to return back to the citizen thing. You wrote that great article. It included a lot of great anecdotes and great stories from your time in Canada. Was there anything that didn't make it into the into that article that you can share with us? Any like other like kind of like anecdotes about your time there, or the like maybe like the process of getting there or back home that were kind of like notable that didn't make it into the article?
yeah, I kind of think I briefly touched on it in the article. But as a personal, like, I like to stay up late and wake up early, which
Hmm.
means I don't get a lot of sleep. And so when you add in going basically to the West Coast and north with the time change, I ended up going about 48 hours with only about 3 to 4 hours of sleep. And in that time span, we went canyoning. We also were up at 3 a.m. to go out to Moraine Lake and catch the sunrise and photograph. Um, so I, taking a step back and reflecting on the trip, am really impressed with what I was able to do on a little bit of sleep there.
Yeah.
But it's also knowing that, like, when you're presented with an opportunity, yeah, you might be uncomfortable, you might not sleep all the way, but you just have to continually push yourself and take opportunities as they arise. And that's, really kind of been my mindset since we come back from that trip, is like, whether I think I can or think I can't do something, if I get an opportunity and it's remotely interesting, I'm going to open the door and just see where it leads me. And if I found out I don't like something, that's great. If I find out that I do love something, that's even better. And then you just keep working and growing and progressing from there.
Yeah. That's really well said. I think that's a good note to end on, to like give things a chance, even if it means you'll be sleep deprived. Because
Yeah.
yeah, that's words to live by, I think.
No, exactly. It's, you can always sleep later, take a nap, or get
Yep.
an energy drink, but push yourself, and
Yep.
you'll be really surprised with what you come out on the other side, having learned about yourself.
Awesome. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on the podcast. It's really been great to chat and to hear more about your background and kind of like philosophy on photography and the citizen trip in particular. It sounds like a really great experience. We'll of course leave show notes for everything we discussed, including the wonderful article Garrett wrote about the trip with all his great photos. Um, and thank you to everyone for listening and tuning into another episode of the Warren and Wound podcast. We really appreciate you joining us, and we will be back next week with another episode. Until then, take care.